is an attempt to appease God and thereby turn away God's wrath for presumed offenses, and was certainly the rationale for animal sacrifice in ancient Near Eastern cultures and in the Greco-Roman culture in which the earliest churches were forming. Propitiation comes from a Greek word, hilasterion, which technically means place of propitiation, and came to mean mercy seat. It makes of God the object of blood sacrifice through the objective intent of changing God's disposition towards the sinner or sinners. Unlike in the privatistic civil religion of our culture and times, in the Hebrew culture that spawned Christianity, sin, like redemption, had a collective connotation, whatever jeopardized the life of the community. Francis Young and others showed that in the Hebrew culture, sacrificial rites were construed not as propitiatory, but as expiatory, designed to remove the stigma of sin from the individual and the community by blotting out or wiping away, expunging, much as a criminal's record is expunged. The ritual use of blood, the only medium acceptable to God, the name, had the power not to change God, but to signify the seriousness of human intentions to live in right relationship. In this view, God, as the acting subject rather than the acted upon object, provides the system of sacrifice as a cultic instrument whereby the people could ritually be restored to each other. The verisimilitude of blood and right relationship is affirmed in the Hebrew people's expiatory rationale for the sacrificial system, a rationale which also evoked the collective memory of the Exodus, the beginning of their call from unjust servitude to peoplehood. The earliest Christian communities may well have understood Jesus' blood loss in this light. His story, unlike those of the many others who were crucified, is infused with religious significance because of the ways those early Christian communities interpreted him to their world. Despite the lack of archaeological evidence and the scant historical references to Jesus Christ in extra-biblical sources, I do accept the witness of those earliest communities that attest to his existence, his career, and significance among them. I do not dispute the article of faith that attempts to situate him historically, namely, that Jesus suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, dead, and buried. For me and for many people, this is the crux of the matter anyway, that this Jesus Christ, whom James Cone refers to as the man for others, suffered like us unjustly, was brutally treated like us and died, and like so many of us, far too young, lynched under the aegis of state-sponsored terrorism. His story is our story, and vested with divine significance, it similarly vested and vests ours. Since writing my book, Power in the Blood, I've often said that the question mark is the most important part of the title, perhaps of the whole book, because it problematizes the confession that many Black Christians freely make. But nodding to the prophetic dimensions of my own vocational identity and to the prophetic voices of Black, feminist, and womanist theologians, I try to demonstrate my awareness of the ways in which the confession has been used both to disempower and to empower communities in conflict and constituencies and factions within a given community. What happened at Calvary relative to one crucifixion of many has been the subject of much discussion and debate, interpretations of which accommodated slavery, the subordination of women, and stimulated wars, and we can go on and on. Therefore, I consider it part of my priestly and prophetic task to inquire as to what continues to inspire such allegiance to Jesus and why his death in particular resonates with Christians to such a profound degree. Many people in the churches can cite the biblical references and seem to afford the story blind acceptance simply because it's in the Bible, which must not be questioned. They accept that the theories of atonement rise to the level of doctrines because they all have biblical warrants, they all seem rational, they are all apprehended, if dimly, in the hymnody, pageantry, litanies, and other traditions of the church, and even somewhat resonate with their experience of their encounter with Jesus Christ. I have said elsewhere that Jesus for me is the complete Redeemer who regularly rescues me from myself, never mind the devil, who paid a debt I could not repay, who teaches me by precept and example how to live and die, and to be a woman for others, unto death even, who gives me hope of overcoming every adversity. The doctrine clearly informs me of the transactional nature of the atonement and the potential for transfiguration of my own life. This is true for others in my communities of accountability, even if the nature of that transaction as an expiation or expunging of sin is misapprehended as a propitiatory one. What happened at Calvary? Did, in fact, some kind of transaction take place that mystically and magically proffered atonement at one meant salvation, redemption, deliverance, liberation to the whole world? If I answer yes, I dissemble, and the kindest definition of that word is to conceal the true nature of, in this instance, my belief. There are few knowable facts about Jesus, who is my regulator and rule of faith. No doctrine handed down by God, only theories and their limited applications from the minds and experiences of an African and 4 Europeans, all of whom are men. Even saying I am a Christian, I dissemble a little. Because I love Jesus and his story, I love the church and take my prophetic and priestly vocation seriously. I have to negotiate with those who see heresy in my eclectic spirituality and in my belief in the Bible as reliable rather than infallible. In order to confess the faith, I am compelled moreover to disassemble, to take apart, to deconstruct the faith claims that have lent to oppression as a faithful prophet, and to rearrange what little truth and what fewer facts emerge from the academic contemplation of the story in order to address my particularities and redress oppression. After all, that is what my liberal seminary education taught me to do, to disassemble, to take apart, to deconstruct the faith claims that have lent to oppression as a faithful prophet. But if I say I do not believe a transaction took place at Calvary, I dissimulate. That is, I lie. I break faith with the truth that allows me to stand as a member and as a leader in the community in the midst of a great struggle for survival and liberation, and who continuously seek and find divine assistance in that struggle. Thinking about how I personally remain a Black Christian woman, thinking about my own allegiance, I look to the prophetic and priestly office of Jesus, the prophet and priest who inspired the allegiance of his first followers because of who he was among them, the one who established the worth of the poor and restored people to health and to community. Following Anselm and Augustine's school of thought, faith in search of understanding, allowing myself to see and believe in the power of story to transform lives, I have been reassembled. I have had my own points of assemblage rearranged, to borrow a phrase from Carlos Castaneda. I see in Christ Jesus' death, construed as an expiation, divine potential to remove from us who have been and are being violated or defile, to use Dolores Williams' term, the stigma associated with the sin visited upon us that we internalize and in turn visit upon ourselves and others, perhaps upon ourselves more than others. Because I have witnessed the actual existential tornness of folks because of sin from within as well as from without, I believe it makes a difference when people have the assurance of pardon and know that it does not depend on our capacity alone, nor does it depend on the personal worthiness of administering priests, nor yet on the capricious will of God, but on the unfailing love of God, who in Christ shed God's own blood as a once-for-all self-giving. After all, the principle of transfiguration, according to Bishop Tutu, says that nothing, no one, and no situation is untransfigurable, that the whole of creation, nature, waits expectantly for its transfiguration, when it will be released from its bondage and share in the glorious liberty of the children of God, when it will not be just dry, inert matter, but will be translucent with divine glory.